Thank you so much for coming back to the Two-Man Power Trip of Wrestling.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it, and I always enjoy being had. And I'd just like to say once again, thank you for exposing me to your audience as well.
Oh, it's been great. I'll tell you what, the couple people that have actually gone out of their way to message me so nicely to say that some of the stories that you told on with us, they hadn't heard you talk about before. So when we can hear something like that, I think we know we're doing something pretty good. But obviously when we got you on the line, we don't know what to expect. So I think it's thumbs up all around.
Well, I don't really know what to expect either because I'm following you guys. You ask the questions, I'll provide the answers. If you ask a question I don't want to answer, I'll just answer another question.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you what, the one that we get the most questions about from when you were on the last time was when we were talking about Survivor Series 93 and the Rock and Roll Express versus the Heavenly Bodies. So that kind of segues into obviously what you did just a mere week plus ago, inducting the Rock and Roll Express into the Hall of Fame. Now, you went into it on the experience, but if you can, just kind of go over what it was like actually arriving in in Orlando for, you were doing other things, but for actually showing up to a WWE event. Like, hell froze over very temporarily, and you were back in the WWE world.
Well, it was a little frosty down there in Orlando, a.k.a. hell. But no, it was an enjoyable time all the way around. I saw a bunch of people. Here's the thing: there's more people that I like than that I don't like in that organization, and I enjoyed seeing those folks. And I stayed away from the people that I didn't particularly want to see. And I honored some old friends of mine and got a chance to tell an entirely new audience and new generation of fans exactly how great the Rock and Roll Express were. So overall, I had a great time.
It was awesome. It was surreal, I got to say. Now, obviously, we know if you're an inside fan or you follow the podcast world, you know that you've had interactions with Ricky and Robert. It's not like you haven't seen them in 20 years, but also being able to see them kind of come out on the WWE stage. It's very cool to see the people recognizing that, and however they picked the Hall of Fame, they made the right choice this year. But when you got that call, were you scratching your head, or were you just actually really honored that they were calling you to induct the Rock and Roll?
Well, I had to admit on my podcast, you mentioned the highly rated, award-winning Jim Cornette Experience. I had to admit that I was wrong because I honestly didn't believe that guys from our generation in the 80s, we were Vince's only competition with Crockett Promotions. We fought neck and neck for a few years there, and then unfortunately TBS got involved and the whole thing went to hell. But I didn't think they were going to honor guys like the Rock and Roll or the Midnight or, the opposition. And I had to admit I was wrong, and I don't like to do that. I have such little practice at doing that because I'm so seldom wrong. but since they did, I was excited about it, and yeah, when I got the call, a lot of people said, you're the only one to do it, and truthfully, I wasn't the only one, but I was probably the obvious pick, and I appreciated that.
No, it was so cool, and I got to say I did kind of hold my breath for a second because when they came out on the stage, I did think you might try to sneak up behind them with the racket and maybe, maybe at least tease a little something going on. But their speeches, it was great. It was, again, just so cool to see them up there because their WWF tenures definitely, I would just say questionable, only because they were definitely kind of fish out of water at where they were put in terms of their placement, and we just spoke with both headbangers, both spending time with them over the weekend and having them on the show, and they were talking about their run that they had with them in '98 and then down in Smoky Mountain, so you obviously know a lot about that. But for them, coming back to WWE, do you think that they were kind of vindicated for those two not bad, but just not stellar runs that they had there?
Well, we were all the victims at that point of we were at the mercy of the Archbishop of Talentberry, shit-stain himself, Vince Russo, who literally used WWF at the time company money to bring a bunch of those guys in and make them look like assholes to prove that, his vision of Jerry Springer style wrestling was, what would get over with people rather than guys that actually were professionals and knew what they were doing and had drawn big money in the past. So now that everybody is pretty much smartened up to this idiot and knows what he's all about and the stupid things that he says himself, I think a lot of the newer generation are taking a look at these guys in a different fashion. I mean, he managed to make the Rock and Roll Express, myself, Barry Windham, some of the legitimately best talents in the decade of the 80s look like shit just through booking them to look like shit on purpose and using company money to do it. And at the time it wasn't that obvious, but now people have come to realize that's what he was doing. He himself has admitted that that's what he was doing. So I think overall now people have come to smarten up to, his bullshit and now look at those guys in a whole different way because they recognize through YouTube and the network and et cetera, the body work those guys had, which was infinitely better than anything that, Cum Guzzler has ever foisted off on the wrestling public.
Yeah, and and it's funny, in talking with the Headbangers, they were kind of sharing that sentiment with you that, it was made to look like a big joke, but still, they were just, tickled pink that they got to work with Ricky and Robert again because they have such admiration for the two of them. And I know, if you look back at some of those matches, if you're an old school fan, you kind of loved it because you got to see Tommy Young come out, you got to see disqualifications for getting thrown over the top rope. But I feel like that little NWA revival, which led to kind of the turn of Jeff Jarrett into, coming back into the WWF, leaving the Double J character behind, a lot of people have forgotten about that angle. And even though it was kind of goofy, it was kind of hokey, if you were an old school fan at the time and you were wanting some NWA, you at least did get the guys on TV.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, the Headbangers, and I love those guys. I kind of discovered them and brought them to Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and that's, then later on, we brought them to the WWE. So many of the wrestlers of the 90s considered it such an honor to wrestle the Rock and Roll Express because they grew up watching them. In a lot of cases, that's why they wanted to be wrestlers in the first place, because of the matches between the Rock and Roll and the Midnight. So for them, even though it was designed to make everybody, involved look bad, it still was an honor for them to get in the ring with guys the caliber of Ricky and Robert. And it was kind of a childhood dream, the boyhood dream. It wasn't just Shawn Michaels winning the WWF Championship. It was a lot of those guys getting a chance to be in the same ring with legends like the Rock and Roll Express.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, again, you are such the perfect person to induct these guys because you've seen so many parts of their career, and including up to that point. But putting that speech together, kind of take us into the Castle Cornette to kind of bring us up there into the war room as you're putting it together. How hard or easy is it to put pen to paper and write such, a from-the-heart thing about two guys you have such a close relationship with, like Ricky and Robert?
Well, it was pretty much impossible because I didn't really write a speech. I wasn't lying when I said, I have a few notes just to keep myself on track or this thing could go to Sunday morning. I didn't write that speech. I wrote some bullet points of some things to talk about. I've never had an interview written for me or written an interview, for that matter, for myself. I've just jotted down a few things that I wanted to remember to mention and gone with it from there. And it was really, that's what it was. I had, I talked for 15 minutes and I had, 4 pages of bullet points. I don't feel like wrestling interviews should ever be written. And I didn't feel like that speech should be written because if I couldn't tell people how great the Rock and Roll Express were off the top of my head, I had no business being there. So the notes were just to keep me from going all night. Of course, it drove the agents crazy and the producers. They're like, what are you going to say? I said, well, I can only do it once because once I do it, it's done. I don't do things over again. Second time is never as good as the first.
Right, and there was so much hype, like you said, there was so much hype going in. Is he going to sue? Is he going to rip on this guy? Is he going to, go deep on Kevin Dunn or whatever? Did you feel that?
Well, here's the thing. I didn't mean to disappoint anybody, but number one, it was not the forum to litigate those issues.
Right.
And number two, I have a feeling we'd gone to color bars or Mighty Mouse cartoon reruns if I'd have got into anything like that anyway. So it wasn't going to get over anyway as far as get on the air. So I decided to stick to the topic that we were there to discuss.
Right. I mean, definitely not the right forum. But did you feel like an unnecessary hype kind of going in that people were going to think that you were going to do something, and obviously you couldn't do it because it's a much more respectful stage?
Well, I didn't before the Hall of Fame. I didn't want to tell everybody, no, I'm not going to go off and say fuck, fuckity McFuck, because then maybe some people wouldn't tune in. But if anybody thought that was the place I was going to do that, I hope I didn't disappoint them. But it wasn't the place for it.
Now, was that something that the Rock and Roll Express called you and asked you to go in, or an agent of WWE, or Vince himself, or Triple H? Who kind of asked you to do the speech? Rock and Roll?
Well, when you were inducted, you are allowed to ask for the person that you would like to induct you, and then it's a process of whether the powers that be want to approve that or not. And obviously, the Rock and Roll said, well, Cornette would be the perfect guy, and then let's just say I got called by someone that was fairly high up in the company and asked if I would do it, and they were very cordial, and all the talks were, the best I can say is cordial. And, and of course I said yes, because it wasn't like I had to go back, sign a long-term contract, give up my soul and my puppy dog and agree to do a bunch of stuff I didn't want to do. It was an agreement for that night to do that, which I wanted to do, and, that was it.
And almost as shocking as kind of you being the Hall of Fame inductor for the Rock and Roll Express was that you did Table for Three on the WWE Network, as Michael Hayes kind of threw out there on Twitter. You and, shockingly, a man you haven't spoke to in 20 years, Eric Bischoff. So what was that like?
Well, that one was one they threw in on me. And, and actually I enjoyed it because I got to tell, because Eric did not remember why that we had only spoken once in 24 years. And at the top of the Table for Three, I reminded him of that. And we did a little jousting back and forth, and then we got on to other topics, and Michael was an excellent moderator. We talked for an hour and a half. I understand that program usually goes less than half of that time, so I don't know if it's going to be a two-parter. I don't know if it's going to be cut up or what. I don't know when it's going to air, but there was some tension. But at the end, Eric and I managed to bond over our mutual hatred for, the biggest idiot in the history of wrestling, Vince Russo. And so the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And Eric and I were able to come to an agreement that, regardless of what we thought of each other in the past, neither one of us even begins to be as big of a shit stain as Vince Russo is. So we bonded over that.
Right, that is great, and it's kind of weird, not only you and Bischoff kind of talking, or you and Bischoff kind of, reminiscing, it's just weird in general to see you back in WWE, but it's almost kind of the right thing for it. If they're going to be the janitors of history, if they're going to have all this stuff on the network, it's only fitting to have a guy like you, who's a huge historian in your own right, back. Wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you say you fit kind of hand in hand with what they're kind of trying to do with the network?
I think in some cases, there's some things on the network that I wouldn't watch if you held a gun to my head, but when they're showing the old footage of WCW or, Crockett Promotions, as you can tell, I lost my voice that week since I didn't sleep for 8 or 9 days. If they're going to be showing stuff like that and exposing the work that all those guys did, especially the Crockett Promotions stuff, to an entirely new audience, I can definitely get behind that because, that stuff holds up today. people remember, and I see it all the time on my Twitter, at the Jim Cornette, or people at, right at my website, jimcornette.com. The stuff from the 80s holds up today, whereas the stuff that was on TV last week, a lot of people can't remember what it was. So, I enjoy that part of it.
That is so true, and I totally agree. Is there any more network projects for you in the future, or is the door open for any more network projects?
Well, there is. We didn't go into this saying, okay, we're just going to do this once and never again. I'm not going to speak to you people after this. If Connecticut was closer to Louisville, I'm sure there'd be a lot more things that I'd be open to. I don't know if they want to pay me as much money as it would take to get me to drive to fucking Connecticut, on a regular basis. I don't fly. Not only do I not fly United Airlines, I don't fly any airlines because of that. You have no rights in an airport anymore. And I don't like being in a fucking metal death tube 5 miles in the air with some drunken fuck that's probably had a fight with his wife in charge of my life. But, if something was to come up, there's two things that I enjoy. Going back and examining and talking about the old footage of when wrestling was actually wrestling, and training the next generation, which I did in OVW for quite some time. And, John Cena, Randy Orton, and those guys are a legacy of that. If it's something to do with that, then yes, I'm entirely open. Not saying we're going to do it, not saying we're not, but I'm open to the suggestion. And to be honest, there's nothing I'm going to be doing full-time for anybody but myself anymore ever again, just because I like being home a lot and on the road very little. And, one thing I saw with that production is those guys that are still in this full-time and still have the passion for it, they're on the road all the time. They're working long hours, 16-hour days or more. That's behind me now. I will visit anywhere, but I'm not going to live anywhere except Castle Cornette in Louisville, Kentucky for the rest of my life.
Now, obviously you were there. You kind of experienced WrestleMania weekend, kind of all over again. What were your thoughts on WrestleMania itself? Did it live up to the hype?
Well, I hate to tell you this, but I didn't see WrestleMania itself. I have Brian Last, my diehard co-host of my podcast and my partner in crime, is going to send me a link to something where I can watch the show. But on WrestleMania Sunday, I was previously committed to do Jim Ross's show, and we did that with Bruce Pritchard, and Mick Foley came by as a surprise guest, and we were there to show some solidarity with JR after the recent events in his life. And after that was because I had the What Culture Pro Wrestling guys come to Louisville a couple of days before we left for Orlando and shoot some stuff here at the Castle. And then we had the 900-mile trip down to Orlando, and then I had 2 full days with the WWE, and then I had the What Culture show, and then I had JR's show. When WrestleMania was going on, I was enjoying my first good night's sleep, and the first meal that I had eaten in about 5 days that wasn't delivered to my hotel room door in a sack. So I was not at WrestleMania and haven't seen it yet, so I can't really comment. But I heard that everybody loved most everything. And I'll say this, I've just got to see, if nothing else, the Undertaker-Roman Reigns match, because I think that the Undertaker, truthfully and honestly, you can talk about Jim Londos, Wild Bill Longson, Strangler Lewis, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, but overall for longevity, professionalism, popularity, the Undertaker is to me the biggest and best attraction in the history of wrestling. And if that was his last match, which everybody's saying it is, that's something I want to see.
And he's always been respected by you, because I remember years ago you making comments that he's one of your favorite people in wrestling and one of the most respectful and respected wrestlers. What is it about The Undertaker that's made him last, 30 years in the WWE and even longer in the wrestling business?
Oh, God, where do I start? Who else has drawn that much money? Who else has had that many great matches over that long a period of time? Who else has never brought bad publicity, either in the ring or outside the ring, onto the company that he worked for? Who else has been a locker room leader and a true professional? Who else has never shit on the wrestling business by going out and doing asinine, childish things or curtain calls or exposing the business? By any measure or any yardstick that you can use, The Undertaker has been not only a true professional, but an incredible gate attraction and made money for himself and everybody he's ever worked with. So, that right there, if you can't respect The Undertaker, you don't respect anybody ever in wrestling.
Pretty crazy to think that 1990, now 2017, he had that long of a run, basically as a main eventer. I mean, as soon as he was in there, he was basically put in the main event. Do you think we'll ever see another guy quite like him? I
think it's going to be tough, especially with, unfortunately, the way that things have gone, the style of work these days and the things that the guys are expected to do. I don't know that anybody's body will ever hold up for 27 years again.
That is true. And on that main event level, definitely tough to do. Pretty crazy to think that this is it after all these years, but man, what a crazy run. So with him kind of being gone and the landscape going to be changing, what are your thoughts on the current roster of WWE? You think they have enough, top guys to kind of keep it going, or are they going to keep able to bring in these part-timers?
Well, everybody says, oh, the part-timers, The Rock comes back and steals a spot, or if I was a young wrestler now and I got the chance to be on a WrestleMania with The Rock or with Steve Austin or with The Undertaker or with another one of these, as they call them, part-time guys, or without them, if I was smart, I would definitely opt in the with column, because you're going to make more money because everybody on the card's going to make more money because those guys are legitimate megastars and they sell pay-per-view and they sell network buys and they sell live event tickets. And John Cena is going to be in the same category here very shortly, where, he's going to wind his schedule down. It's not about guys coming in and stealing spots. It's about guys who don't have to do this anymore, but they do it because they love the business and they love the opportunity to get in the ring and perform, coming back and drawing more money for everybody. So anybody who doesn't want to be on The Rock's card or Steve Austin's card or The Undertaker's card, then they need to go work PWG in California in front of 400 people and just get all their shit in, as Rip Rogers would say, and make no fucking money and get paid off in goddamn hot dogs and fucking six-packs. Because if you want to make money, you want a megastar in the main event so that the card that you're on will draw more for everybody. Anything else is just stupid.
Definitely. Do you see anybody on the current roster that you could see kind of breaking out from the mold? Would it be like a Roman Reigns?
Well, and once again, I don't follow the modern product, and not just WWE, but I've been clean and sober from modern wrestling for a while because it drives me crazy. I see guys that do the spots with their dicks, and I see, the people that do hypnosis in the ring and they super kick grade school children or whatever the fuck, and that's why I don't want to watch any more of modern wrestling, because it just drives me insane and I want to hang myself in my closet. But, Roman Reigns has taken a bad rap because he is the guy that the people know that he was the guy that was handpicked by the evil empire to be the guy. And so all of a sudden, just because he has the look and he has the ability and he has the stamina and the youth and the bloodlines and the whole nine yards to be a main event guy, that doesn't matter, because the fans want to rebel, because the McMahon family has been painted as the heels for so long, and there's a reason why that the promotions of wrestling down through the years, over the last 100 years, always wanted to be the baby faces, never painted themselves as heels. Because then the people go, well, why are we giving you our money, you dumb motherfuckers? So with Vince McMahon, it worked because he was one of the great performers in the history of wrestling. But after that, it doesn't work. It backfires. So Roman Reigns, unfortunately, has been a victim of that. And, I think the guy, I don't think he's the greatest wrestler that's ever lived, but I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with him. I think he's got all the tools. I think he needs a little more experience. And I think he'll be fine except for the baggage that he's carrying that's beyond his control. Once again, I'm a big Seth Rollins fan. I loved him when he was Tyler Black in Ring of Honor. And when I first saw him, I said, this guy's going to be a major, major megastar. And there's some other guys that I feel that way about, and it just depends on the way that they're presented, truthfully, as to whether the fans pick up on that or not. Because these days it's not just about the talent a wrestler has, but it's about how the fans perceive them based on whether they think that they're being told to like them or whether they're being allowed to like them or not. They almost were told not to like Daniel Bryan. That's why they loved him, because he's great talent. But he was being presented like, oh, don't like this guy because he's a flunky. So they said, fuck you. We're going to like him because he's great. And, what we are experiencing now is the reason why that wrestling has been a work for 125 years. Because the people like the heels because they're more entertaining. And when you're told that wrestling is a work, wrestling doesn't work. So they like the heels. They don't like the baby faces. They don't like guys that have the talent because they're being told to like them. But sometimes they like guys that couldn't draw money with paper and green crayons because they're told that they shouldn't like them. It's the psychology is all fucked up. Wrestling does not work when people know that it's a work. And that's what we're experiencing right now.
See, I kind of think a lot of the problem goes with the fan base changing, and now the fan base is really wanting to create its own cluster of them being a part of the roster, and they're trying to dictate, whether they're taking over the shows or they're starting inane and ridiculous and dumb chants throughout the show to throw guys off and boo stuff they don't like, which I know they've been doing forever, but booing, spots where they shouldn't be booing just for the sake of it. But at the end of the day, it's Vince McMahon's company. Vince McMahon's going to say what he wants to do and what he thinks is best. And the role we've kind of talked about with a few people is that this new fan base doesn't really see Triple H as a bad guy and a guy who held down talent for 10-plus years. They see him as somebody who's fostering in the next generation. And I kind of feel like that's where the disconnect is lying between the fan base and why it's been taking them 3+ years to get Roman Reigns either as the top babyface or see where they're wrong and make him the top heel, because these fans want to be part of the show and they just want to do everything that the old guard doesn't like. They don't want to like those guys.
Well, I'll tell you this. I didn't like Triple H for 15 years because of the curtain call. I thought he was a piece of shit for exposing the business along with his butt buddies. He was the junior member at the time. Michaels and Nash were the ringleaders, and Ramon Hall. But by the same token, now Triple H, remember what I said, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Triple H is now responsible for NXT, which is the most pro wrestling promotion on a big budget level in the world today. So, people can change and things change. And, I would be a stubborn prick, which of course I am, but I'd be a stubborn prick if I didn't say, well, he may have done some bullshit before, but now, guys like the Revival wouldn't have a chance if it wasn't for the Revival's the best tag team in wrestling. I love the Briscoes in Ring of Honor, and I was a huge fan of Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli when they were the kings of wrestling. I thought they were the modern-day version of the Midnight Express. But right now, the Revival is the best tag team in wrestling, and NXT has the best pro wrestling presentation of big budget wrestling, Ring of Honor being a close second in the business. So, this is why I'm like, goddamn, Hey, when I walked in the TV hotel in Orlando, at first I saw Ric Flair, I saw Sting, I saw the Rock and Roll Express. I'm like, my God, this is a Crockett pay-per-view. In the same weekend, Jim Ross, Kurt Angle, and Jim Cornette returned to WWE television. This is like the bizarro world. I don't know what to think anymore.
And even second that, saying it's like a Crockett pay-per-view, how about you take a look around the locker room, or you take a look around your Monday nights or Tuesday nights, you see Samoa Joe, Bobby Roode, Claudio, Chris Heroes in NXT, Austin Aries, Eric Young, all these guys that cut their teeth, including guys that you might not be a huge fan of, cutting their teeth for years and years. Now, they're in the WWE, and that's almost like Bizarre World. But do you feel like, and that kind of feels like, has Triple H has Jim Cornette kind of turned his other cheek to Triple H at this point?
Well, and you mentioned Samoa Joe and Bobby Roode. I've been a huge fan of Bobby Roode since I started with TNA in 2006. I think he is the modern-day equivalent of Arn Anderson. Tremendous worker, always in the right place at the right time, makes himself and his opponents look great. I think Samoa Joe is one of the next big stars. I think next year's WrestleMania main event should be Brock Lesnar and Samoa Joe. I've been waiting for Joe to break away from, he was the victim of, shit-stains booking for so long that I thought that this another guy like a Matt Morgan that's never going to get the chance that he deserves because of his talent, because of he just had a complete blithering idiot in charge of the company he was working for. But now all of a sudden he's got that opportunity, and so if Triple H is the guy you got to thank for that, well, I guess we got to thank him for it. But that's the thing. These guys have been waiting for an opportunity for so long. I threw my body in front of Tyler Black, Seth Rollins signing a TNA contract when he was leaving Ring of Honor. He called me one day, and he said, well, they've offered me this in TNA, and WWE won't call me back. I said, just fucking ask these questions and delay this thing and see if you can get a call back from the other people, because you don't want to be stuck in TNA because the guy in charge of it doesn't get people over, he gets people under. And fortunately, that came to pass. So all those guys now that had the talent, AJ Styles, for God's sake, I just wish it had been 5 years beforehand. His body would probably feel a lot better. But these guys that were carrying the ball in TNA, and because of Dixie Carter being so stupid, if it was raining soup, she'd be out in the yard with a fork. She was paying all these goddamn ex-WWF fucking stars that were just taking her money and bleeding her dry for a paid vacation. She was paying them twice as much money as the people that were actually carrying the ball and working hard and making the matches. And now those guys are finally getting their opportunity, and it was delayed, but at least it finally came. So, I'm happy for that.
So then let's just play a quick hypothetical. So if this was 10 years ago, and you were still kind of, you weren't fully out of the business at that point, but you weren't, you were getting, I guess you're on your way to Ring of Honor, still kind of with TNA, but if this was WWE 10 years ago, and knowing what you had to go through in WWE and all the BS and all the dumb stuff you had to deal with, would you have made a return or at least tried to work with these guys on the main roster if this is what the WWE looked like 10 years ago?
No, I would have gone to NXT. I still wouldn't want to be on the main roster, and I'm definitely not going overseas except for an obscene amount of money, which I've been paid a couple of times here recently to go to England. Love the folks in the UK. They don't have any ice over there, but I love them. But I would have been interested in NXT because that's why I was interested in OVW. That's why I was interested in Ring of Honor. I wanted to impart some wisdom and hopefully also preserve and perpetuate professional wrestling instead of sports entertainment. I've always, over the last 15 years, been more interested in the new talent and training guys to get over for the new generation than I have about, wringing everything I can out of the previous generation. So I would have definitely been interested in working with NXT because, myself, Jim Ross, and Danny Davis invented the developmental program in the first place.
That's right. And if I could just touch on a couple other guys in WWE, or, they went through NXT, obviously they went through ROH, and that's kind of where you know them from, but Kevin Steen, a.k.a. Kevin Owens, and Sami Zayn, a.k.a. Generico, not that I have a beef with them, but I always think it's funny that everyone's like, oh, Cornette was wrong about those two, blah, blah. They did exactly what you told them to do, except they did it in WWE and NXT, and that's kind of how they got over. Do you ever feel like, some of these people are completely off base with as far as Zayn and Owens?
Well, once again, everybody said, oh, Cornette must be hanging himself in his closet and slitting his wrists because they're so successful, which is ridiculous. Kevin Steen and El Generico were both pains in the ass to deal with. It was the 80-20 principle. You spend 80% of your time dealing with 20% of your fucking talent's problems. Part of it's they're French-Canadian. And I'm sorry, but French-Canadians in wrestling have always been pains in the ass, except for Pat Patterson. But part of it was, we're paying you to play professional athletes on television. So, Steen, we'd like you to lose some weight, fucking buy some new clothes, and fucking trim your beard up and look a little neater. El Generico, a television company, has just bought the promotion you work for, so we'd like you to be able to do interviews instead of being a mute, and we'd like you to take the goddamn mask off, because I didn't even broach that with him, because that would have been, oh my God, I'd have sodomized, his fucking mother if I'd have said take the mask off. But you've got a French-Canadian Muslim with red hair trying to play a fucking Mexican luchador, and nobody understood it. If you can't learn to fucking speak and do interviews, and nobody understands that silly gimmick, you're a great fucking worker and you're selling as Ricky Morton level, but your gimmick is fucking stupid. So basically do what the people that are paying you ask you to do, and you'll get along a little better. And son of a gun, we just found out that Ring of Honor wasn't paying them enough money, because when somebody comes along and pays them more money, they do what we asked them to do, and as a result, they're tremendously successful. I never said they were fucking horrible wrestlers. We made Steen the world champion for a fucking year. We tried to sign Generico to another contract, but that's when he had the WWF sniffing around him, and so he wouldn't do it. So we didn't use him. And everybody thought, oh, goddamn, Cornette's run these guys off. No, I just wanted them to be more accessible to a wider audience. When they've done basically everything I asked them to do, they are now superstars. Imagine that. Wouldn't you know who won the pony?
Exactly. I feel like these, trolls or whatever you want to call them on Twitter or whatever else, they're always wrong. They don't really analyze it correctly. They pretty much, they did what you wanted them to do, and now they're successful. But of course, it all came with getting paid more money, and I guess that was the secret sauce.
Yeah, that's. I never said that, once again, that they were bad wrestlers or that they couldn't get over. I said they ain't going to get over unless they do certain things to tweak what they've already got. They've done that, and they've been successful. They never embarrassed the business by, once again, beating up grade school children or having matches with blow-up dolls. Kenny Omega, I've said this about him, I don't care if he discovers a cure for cancer in his spare time, brings Lou Thesz back from the grave and stretches him in a chute. He's still a piece of shit that should never be in the business because he had matches with 9-year-old girls and blow-up dolls. I don't care how good he is. I don't have any time for him, don't want to look at him, don't want to hear about him. If I had complete control over pro wrestling, I would have, goddamn Dan Severn go and fucking beat the fuck out of him and leave him laying in a fucking ditch. Because he embarrassed his profession, and he embarrassed everybody that's ever been in it. Steen and Generico didn't do that. They just had misguided ideas about some of their fucking facets of their gimmicks and their personalities. And they didn't do phony spots with their dick, like that fucking idiot Joey Ryan. It's just blatantly phony bullshit, because he's an underneath guy that doesn't have the talent to compete with the major main event level wrestlers, so he does this shit to get attention. And everybody, Cornette says all that stuff because He wants people to listen to his podcast. How can he take wrestling that seriously? Well, I do. I've made several $1 million off of wrestling, and it's been not only my profession, but my favorite thing in life as a hobby since I was 9 years old. So, yeah, I do take it that seriously. And Joey Ryan's an embarrassment to it. So is Kenny Omega. At least Omega's got a job now on top. Joey Ryan's still working outlaw shows in front of 400 people, shaking his dick, because that's all he can do. But Steen and Generico never fit in that category. They were more frustrating to me because they had the talent and just wouldn't listen to anybody until finally somebody started paying them enough money for them to listen.
Funny how that goes sometimes. But, with ROH, I know obviously you left them and everything else. With Delirious there as the booker, were you mentoring him along? And is that like how he got into that role as booker? Were you kind of, a guiding force for him?
Well, I don't want to come out here and say, oh, yes, I got so-and-so his job and I taught so-and-so this. And, like Russo, I invented air and water. Delirious was a student of the business, was already very dedicated to the company, was running the training facility, had a lot of great ideas, and had a tremendous work ethic. What he had never done was write television and deal with a production at even Ring of Honor's level, which I had. So I enjoyed working with him probably more than anybody since I was on the booking committee in WCW and worked with guys like Kevin Sullivan and Ric Flair, because we were not only friends, but also he was an excellent student. He wasn't like Russo, where he didn't want to learn anything because he thought he knew everything and he wanted to make a Jerry Springer show. He wanted to do a wrestling show. He just needed to know certain things about how to write formats and how to produce television. I was able to help him with that. He was able to help me with things like relating to the younger talent, like the Briscoes and Adam Cole. And I don't want to leave anybody out, but so many of the Ring of Honor stars that Kyle O'Reilly, the younger generation. So we helped each other, and it was fun. I definitely put a word in for him to be the booker, especially when Sinclair bought the company and they could make any change they want. I said, you don't need to change. This is the perfect guy to do this. And I think he's done a tremendous job, especially under challenging circumstances, once again working with a corporate entity, because the recipe for disaster in wrestling, just add suits. And that was the big problem with Ring of Honor in the first couple of years of the Sinclair era, is that the fans just didn't understand how much time we were spending trying to tell these fucking people, this is the wrestling business, you can't do certain things like this. And really, I'd still be there today if it wasn't for the fact that I wasn't making a lot of money doing that. I was doing it for the love of the game. I make twice as much money now doing my own thing and spending a quarter of the time on the road, but I wanted to get that product on television and exposed to a bigger audience. But Greg the Office Boy, it came down to I was either going to kill him, I was going to have a stroke, or I was going to go home. I chose the latter because it was the lesser of three evils.
And that story itself is nuts, and we don't want to take up that much more time because obviously there's other things that we want to hit on before we let you go. But that story, if people don't know it, go out of your way to find it. I believe you detail it quite well in a kayfabe commentaries release. And wow, is all I'll say about that. But let's just talk about briefly, really quick, a very big success story of Jim Cornette, and it's somebody down from Smoky Mountain. We talked about the last time, and he's on the verge of making a really big announcement, and that's Glenn Jacobs about to make a very historic run for an office. And actually, by the time this airs, we'll have made that announcement for the run for office. But kind of talk about his acceleration through the business. And did you ever think that he'd be running for the mayor of especially a place like Knox County, Tennessee, a Smoky Mountain territory?
Well, actually, Glenn's from Missouri, and he was wrestling in Puerto Rico, and as most people who wrestle in Puerto Rico do, he was about to go out of his mind and wanted to come home, and Dutch Mantell called me because Dutch had left doing my color for Smoky Mountain to take the job booking in Puerto Rico, and he said, I got this kid. He wants to come home, and God, he's going to be great, and he'd be perfect for Smoky Mountain. He wants a job. And I said, well, that's all I need to hear, because Dutch is the one who found me Mark Calloway when we needed a skyscraper in WCW, and we had him for 6 months, and then Vince took him and he became the Undertaker. Anytime Dutch Mantell says you got to use this guy, I did. So Glenn moved to Knoxville and he never left. We brought the Undertaker down and put him in the ring with Glenn as Unabomb, and Undertaker saw a great opponent for pay-per-view and a great talent, a great human being. Put the word in for him with Vince. A couple of bobbles with, early gimmicks, and then we hit on the Undertaker's brother thing, and Kane became a thing. But Glenn has lived in Knoxville now since 1995, and he's been one of the guys in the WWF. Once again, you talk about somebody who's never brought bad publicity on the company, always been reliable, no bad habits, produced in the ring, drawn huge money. He was, as JR referred to it, he was in the seven-figure club, making over $1 million a year, a number of years in the WWF. And now that he's winding down his wrestling career, he owns an insurance agency down there. He's involved with the community. And I don't know that we agree politically. He's a libertarian, and I'm a socialist Democrat, or democratic socialist. I'm about as close to Bernie Sanders as you can be in terms of my political beliefs, but Glenn Jacobs is a great human being, and old Mayor Burchett is term limited down there in Knoxville. He actually made it Jim Cornette Day one day last year when I went back down there. Mayor Burchett did. I appreciate him for that, but he's out, and now the spot's open, and Glenn is running, and I wouldn't put it past him to win it. And I don't care what his political beliefs. I know that Glenn is an honest and a well-meaning guy who would do the best that he could at the job, and I'm pulling for him.
And like I said, by the time this airs, there will be an announcement that would have been made just for speculative purposes for those listening. But,
he's running. He told me at WrestleMania he's running. So
well,
you don't have to worry about what the announcement is. He's going to run, and I hope he wins.
He shared a very nice chat with us that will have aired that will be detailing the entire announcement. But one thing we did talk about with him, and I'd love to get your take on this because of certain political views you do have. Let's talk about him using celebrity for good, because he's somebody that definitely has had to portray a very demonic character, a very scary character. But to the folks down in Knox County, Tennessee, he's a very soft-spoken guy. He's always doing charitable work. And in this instance, we see somebody who's using their celebrity for a real good thing, and that is to help grow a community.
Well, exactly. And that's the thing is that apart from political beliefs, and I mean, of course, Donald Trump is an egomaniacal megalomaniac. He's a fucking criminal. He's unprepared and unqualified and incapable of the job that he's in. His entire cabinet and all the people he surrounds himself with are either his family or are all criminals. They're all wanting to benefit their billionaire buddies. They're demolishing the EPA. They're going to destroy the environment. They're going to give all the power back to the big banks and the big fucking corporations and the drug companies. They can't even get their shit together to give us health care. I'm sure the tax reform bill will go nowhere also. He doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. But a guy like Glenn Jacobs, especially in the community that he lives in, cares about people, is at the bottom, regardless of his political affiliation, is a nice guy, is an intelligent guy, is a well-spoken guy, and wants to do good for himself and for the people that he would govern or the people that live in his community. That's the kind of politicians, regardless of their political affiliation, that we ought to support. Problem is, on a national basis, the Republicans are all about making sure everybody has all the guns they want so they can murder and slaughter all the school children and kill the environment for the sake of corporate profits and basically benefit the top 2% instead of the bottom 98%. A guy like Glenn at a local level cares about the people he lives around and deals with and wants to do right. That's the difference between local politics and national politics. That's the difference between a libertarian on a local basis and a supposed Republican, which no Republican has any good ideas, but at least John McCain, he was somewhat of an honorable human being. I might have been for him if he didn't have a goddamn complete whack job meth addict like Sarah Palin running with him, just because the Republicans that year figured Hillary was going to run and thought anybody with a vagina, we got to run a woman against Hillary because they'll vote for anybody with a pussy. It's fucking ridiculous. Local politics, national politics are two different animals.
Well,
not to be, opinionated or anything, but just telling the truth.
Well, as we start to wind it down here, we could probably, talk to you all night, whether it be about politics or about wrestling. But, a topic with you that's got to come up a lot, and I know we've asked you this the last time you were on, but, we always say, the favorite midnights, and like you said, it was like impossible for you to say your favorite midnight was it, Bobby and Dennis or Bobby and Stan. But what about a favorite midnight match against the Rock and Roll Express? Do you have maybe one or two or maybe more favorite midnight matches against the R&Rs?
Oh, God. Some of them weren't on video, but I'll tell you this. I mentioned in the Hall of Fame speech that we sold out the Charlotte Coliseum 4 times in an 8-week period with the Rock and Roll. And the final match, which was me hung in a cage, it was shot and aired on Japanese television. That actually does exist on video at JimCornette.com on the Midnight Express DVD, The Lost Matches, Wrestling Rarities. You can go to JimCornette.com and find that. And that probably was one of the best matches of the 86 run that we ever had put on tape. Another one is Wrestle War 1990 when it was Bobby and Stan against the Rock and Roll. There was a few, but so many in those days, so many of the house show matches that where we really had time were never taped and were lost to. It was before the pay-per-view era, and they're lost to time now. But those are two of them.
Such a great feud and unbelievable. Probably two of the greatest tag teams of all time. I mean, arguably you can throw a couple in there, but they're definitely in the top 5 at least. Any incarnation of the Midnight Express in the top 5. Do you think with, the Midnights and the Rock and Roll Express, do you think tag team wrestling will ever get back to that point? Is the revival the closest thing we're going to see to kind of getting back to that old school, awesome tag team wrestling?
Well, for a while I thought that, but now that I see the revival and their matches with DIY and American Alpha, I think there's kids that are aspiring to be wrestlers, haven't even gone to their first day of training, but they're watching those matches and they're saying, we want to be like those guys. Just like the revival watched the Midnight and the Rock and Roll and said, we want to be like those guys. So it can be done. I was pessimistic for a while, but I think it may can happen.
You know what I mean, I love the Revival. They're my favorite tag team probably in many, many years. The thing I liked about them was I heard that they basically, if you're down in NXT and WWE in general, you pretty much have all this footage that you can possibly imagine. And that they were basically saying, oh, we want to watch the Andersons. We want to watch the Midnight Express. So all they do is basically, not all they do, but they do watch a lot of footage. Do guys like that impress you, like guys that really care about the business?
Well, yes, and besides that, they're from North Carolina. So they grew up with seeing, it wasn't like they were stuck in Rhode Island. All they saw was the old WWF, which, they saw, guys who grew up in North Carolina saw the best in-ring talent in the business, the Horsemen and Flair and et cetera, et cetera. So they already saw it, and then they went out of their way as they got older and got in the business to go back and look at the finer points and study it. And I did the same thing. When I was managing the Midnight Express, I'm not going to say that I trained Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey and Stan Lane. That would be ludicrous. But I watched all the wrestling that I could find on videotape, and then I said, okay, Bobby Eaton does this, Dennis Condrey does this, or Stan Lane does this, and they do it well. How can we put those things together where they can do double team moves or they can complement each other? And that was how we kind of put all that stuff together. And that's the same thing the guys are doing now with that incredible library of footage. They're the ones who get it. The ones who don't get it are going, well, I could do a triple flip into some thumbtacks, you know, and that would get a pop from all 300 people in the fucking barn that I'm wrestling in. But the guys who really get it, they go back and they study the guys who drew money and who were tremendous in-ring performers and who had the psychology and took the fans on the roller coaster ride and got their points across whether they were heels or baby faces. That footage is out there for them now, and for them, they go back and look and they take that and they don't just steal it outright. Because when you steal from one person, it's plagiarism. When you steal from many, it's research. They research and they figure out a way to make it their own, and they use that to get themselves over by saying, okay, I'm going to take this from Tully Blanchard, and I'm going to take this from Arn Anderson, I'm going to take this from the Midnight Express, I'm going to take this from Ric Flair, I'm going to take this from Terry Funk, but I'm going to put my own spin on it. But I'm going to learn basically how to work, not just how to be a video game, you know, wrestler, which is unfortunately what the majority of folks in our business these days want to do. They want to imitate the video games that they play. That's another reason why the promos suck for the most part, because you went in the locker room 30 years ago and you had guys like Wahoo McDaniel and Terry Funk and Dick Murdoch and Ric Flair and those guys telling stories, because you didn't have cell phones and video games and smart tablets and Twitter and bullshit, so you had to tell stories to entertain each other. It was like the old days when on the Dick Van Dyke Show, when they would all get together in Dick Van Dyke's living room and put on a show. You had to get over with the toughest audience in the fucking world, which was wrestlers that had heard and seen every story and been involved in everything. And if you could tell a story and keep their attention, you could cut a promo. Now I walk in the locker room, there's 15 guys there and nobody's saying a word. They're all sitting there playing with something on their fucking phone. No wonder they can't do promos. They can't tell a fucking story.
Very true. I mean, obviously, the days of the...
I walked into a Global Force Wrestling show last summer, one of the first house shows they did. Jeff asked me to come down. And I walked in, and there was 12 guys there, and it was it was like a library. It was the quietest locker room I'd ever been in. Everybody was sitting there looking at their phone. Nobody was talking about who they fucked the night before, or who they ribbed the night before, or what the fuck was going on, or any funny story from what they did last week, or a show they were on, or whatever. They were all sitting there texting other people that weren't even in the... Sometimes they text people that are in the room. They can see them, and they're texting them. It's the goddamn most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life. No wonder they can't cut promos. They can't tell a story because they don't talk to anybody.
Definitely the day of the the spontaneous promo or the shoot from the hip promo, or something off the top of your head. I guess those days are gone. It's all scripted now. Well,
I'm glad that I got out before it was, because I told the writers when they asked me about the Hall of Fame speech, they said, well, do you have your speech? And I said, well, yeah, I got it in my head. I said, but I can't really tell it to you, because if I say it once, the next time I do it, it won't be any good, because it'll be the second time, and the second time's never as good as the first. They said, just do what you're going to do. So thank you. If I'd ever had somebody write something down for me and say this, we wouldn't be talking now, because I wouldn't have been able to do it.
And the second time here was just as good as the first. Mr. Cornette, Mr. Jim Cornette, this has been a ton of fun. We thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.